Welcome to Trump's Trade War, the Hub's daily YouTube show where we look at President Trump's trade moves and the reactions of Canadians and their government. I'm Harrison Lohman, managing editor of the Hub, and I'm so pleased to be joined today by Theo Argytis. He is the Hub's new business and economics editor at large. How are you doing today, Theo?
I'm doing well. How are you doing, Harrison?
I'm doing pretty well. Finally, we have someone in studio. I'm not speaking to someone over the line, so I'm happy about that. Okay, so Prime Minister Carney, he went on a whirlwind tour of Europe over the last few days. He went to Paris. He went to London. What did he accomplish on his Euro trip?
Well, I think he wanted to be very proactive and signal both to the Americans and to Canadians as well that we can pivot to more reliable allies if we need to. What did he accomplish? Other than that, I don't think there were many deliverables other than the symbolic gesture of going to Europe. But I think that Canadians are. There's a psychological component as well. We need to feel like, at a time when our largest trading partner is attacking us, that we do have options. So in that sense, he succeeded, I suppose, but there were no obvious deliverables, including no signal from our allies in Europe that they're ready to defend us in any concrete way.
Yes. Emotional in some ways, too, given that it's like a homecoming for him in a way, going back to England, being their former governor of their central bank, speaking to the king, it being the mother country, et cetera, et cetera. You said one of the takeaways, we were chatting previously, was that he maybe is changing his mind as it relates to Canada's ability to go toe-to-toe with the Americans when it comes to a trade war, them lobbing tariffs at us, our retaliatory tariffs. Can you shape that a bit more? What do you mean by that?
Yeah, well, the interesting thing is there was some expectation that he might be going to Europe and trying to get kind of a joint response or some type of mini agreement where they would, agree to jointly en masse kind of fight back against the Americans. He did not get that. So I found it interesting after he held his meeting. So the press conference was after the meeting with Prime Minister Starmer in London. He had also met with Macron, where he said, well, you know what, there are limits to how much we can do in terms of retaliatory tariffs. And that's kind of like stating the obvious because the U.S. economy is a much larger economy.
Much larger. Yeah.
And we rely much more on the U.S. than the U.S. relies on us. But up until then, really the government rhetoric on the issue was dollar for dollar. We are not going to be dollar for dollar. We are going to be less than that because essentially, we can't win a trade war with the U.S. That's kind of what he is also signaling. And so that kind of raises the question, so what is the strategy then? If we're not going to go dollar for dollar, what is the optimal retaliatory tariff? What is the strategy? I'm not sure we've gotten that yet. We don't know, what that optimal level is. I think it also raises the question whether any tariffs are optimal. If we don't think we're going to win a trade war, then why are we even doing these partial retaliatory tariffs? So I think these are important questions to be asking ourselves right now.
Just one more question before we move to your graph showing what the trade relationship has looked like over the last few years. There is what we learned from them, what you just described, and then there's what they're learning from us. In some ways, I don't know if you feel this, it feels like Canada is sort of a guinea pig in that Europeans are looking towards us saying, okay, what does it look like when you retaliate to this extent against Trump tariffs? How does he respond? Do we have a sense of what the Europeans have learned from us in terms of what we're experiencing from Trump?
I agree that we are a little bit of an experiment for the rest of the world. Interestingly, we have been hitting the Americans much harder in terms of retaliatory tariffs up until now than the rest of the world. Much harder than the Mexicans, much harder than the Chinese, and much harder than the Europeans as well. So, I don't know if that pivot away from dollar for dollar retaliation is telling in any way, but I think you're right. I think we are a test case, and in our case, we've decided to hit hard. Up until now, hit back the Americans in a kind of hard way, and it'll be interesting to see, based on Mr. Carney's comments, whether we're actually moving back from that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Right now, we're kind of responding in kind. Okay, so let's look at your graph here. There's what we think the trade relationship is, and then there's what it is in reality. So I know the EU is Canada's third largest trading partner after the US and China, but just walk us through this. What are we seeing here? The share of total Canadian export of goods and services since 1997. What jumps out for you in terms of what viewers should be looking at?
Yeah, I think viewers should be looking at that line, that vertical line that shows when the start, when the comprehensive free trade agreement with Europe kind of began its implementation. That
Canada and the EU. Yeah.
Canada and the EU and the UK as well, late 2017. And what that shows is, despite the fact that we actually do have a free trade agreement with Europe, we actually haven't seen an increase in the share of trade we do with Europe. So the reason why I mention it is because there are a lot of people and kind of reflective as well in the rhetoric that we're hearing from Ottawa, that we can just simply diversify. That's an option, and that is something that may be an option in the long run, but it's not an option in the short run. And people don't even, in many instances, don't even realize that we actually have a free trade agreement with the EU already. So it's not even clear,
what that next step.
What the next step
could we
is.
do? What would you say? Like, what can be done to, make that bond tighter?
Well, I mean, I think what could be done is kind of somehow encourage investment to kind of investment flows between the two regions, because usually investment goes first and then you have a trade follows. Usually a lot of the trade that takes place between Canada and the U.S., between Canada and the U.S., for example, is interfirm or intrafirm, I should say, trade. So usually the investment happens and those firms trade internally, and then you get a lot of trade that way. What we might be seeing here is that we have the free trade agreement, but we haven't seen the investment kind of come along that would facilitate that trade.
So, it's in print, but not so much in reality. Just the headline for viewers again here is that free trade is implemented, but the relationship doesn't really change that much.
Yeah, diversifying is a slog. I mean, it's not something you could just kind of turn with a switch, right? It takes a lot of time. With the U.S., we've been trading with the U.S. deeply for decades, and we were trading with the U.S. In a kind of deep way well before the U.S.-Canada Free Trade Agreement, right? So we've always traded heavily with the U.S. It's not something that we can easily unlearn.
And you can't take our relationship with America, that puzzle piece out, and put in our relationship with Europe. It's not. They're not.
It's not interchangeable.
No.
And in fact, I think the more likely kind of alternative scenario for us, if we want to do less trade with the U.S., the kind of the alternative scenario is not more trade with Europe, but it's probably less trade with everyone, more autarky, more isolation rather than more diversification.
Just a couple more points. If we were to increase that trade, you mentioned there might be some sort of strings attached as it relates to climate policy. The Europeans think much differently than the Americans at this point as it relates to public policy around climate. Can you give me a sense of what that might look like?
Well, actually, it's Carney who mentioned it in the context of the carbon price for industrial emitters, which Mr. Poilievre announced earlier this week that he would be canceling.
Along with the consumer price.
With the consumer price. So not only do consumers pay a carbon price in this country, or carbon tax, but also the heavy emitters like the steel companies and the oil and gas firms as well. So in Europe, they are introducing next year carbon tarbs. So essentially, it's kind of like
they're having their own tariffs. Sorry to interrupt.
So it's kind of like a carbon price for industrial emitters, but from other countries.
Okay.
So if you're an exporter and your country doesn't have a price on carbon for industrial emitters, you will pay a carbon tariff equivalent for the EU to send your goods into the EU. So essentially, what Carney is saying is that if we eliminate a price on a carbon price for industrial emitters in Canada, we will be paying a higher tariff in the EU. So, which is factually true. But that's a partial analysis, because what happens is that the Americans don't have a price for their industrial emitters. So the higher the price that we put on our industrial emitters might make us more competitive in the EU, but it will make us less competitive in the US. So it's pick your poison, right?
So you add here, you subtract here.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. Okay, let me just round things off with this. Theo, is this just going to be, we're planning for a number of different policy issues to potentially be discussed on the campaign trail. Everyone thinks Carney's going to call this on Sunday. Is this, however, just going to be a trade election? Is this just going to all be about Trump? It's all going to be about our relationship with the U.S. and potential tariffs and the future of the Canadian economy as it relates to what the relationship with the U.S. looks like?
I mean, it's going to be a big part of it. There's no question about it. I mean, Trump not just Trump's kind of behavior, but also what is looking like a new world order. I mean, we're going to have to kind of debate what that looks like. And I don't think it's just about negotiating with Trump. I think it's also about how do we restructure our economy in this new world order, and what are the sort of things we want to put in place, what do we want to change, and what we want our economy to look like in 10 years from now if the U.S. decides, which it looks like they will, to create tariff walls around their economy. So I think we're going to have definitely a debate about economic issues one way or the other.
Okay. Well, thanks for that. We'll look for your upcoming piece in the Hub on this EU-European trade relationship with us in coming days. Folks, that's Theo Argydas. He is our new editor-at-large for business and economics here at the Hub. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.